سلام و خیر و مقدم دارم خدمت همه مخاطبین عزیزی که به جمع ما پیوستن و خوشحال هستم که امروز در این وبینار در خدمت شما هستم. بنده سفورا اللهی هستم، پژوهشگر برنامه توسعه اکوسیستم نوآوری ایران در پژوهشکده سیاستگذاری شریف و افتخار اینو دارم که امروز در خدمتتون باشم با یک وبینار بر روی موضوع مزیت گرایی هوشمند، یک استراتژی نوآورانه برای پیشرفت مناطق کمتر توسعه یافته در ایران. با توجه به اینکه ممکنه ما بین مخاطبان انگلیسی زبان هم داشته باشیم، اجازه میخوام که یه خیر مقدم هم خدمت اونها عرض کنم و بعد دوباره برمیگردیم و در مورد موضوع وبینار با شما صحبت خواهم کرد. Hello everyone. My name is Safora Allahy and I'm very pleased to be here with you in this webinar at SPRI events. The subject of the webinar would be on smart specialization, and we are honored to be with our distinguished presenter, Dr. Marina Ranga. She is a policy officer at European Commission Joint Research Center and also a professor in innovation and entrepreneurship at Warsaw University. We hope you will find this webinar insightful and enjoy that. You can ask your question by putting comments in the Sharif Policy Research Institute page. And also, at the end, we will provide you with a recorded version of this webinar on YouTube channel and Instagram. Stay with us, and I wish we will have a very great webinar. خب، عرض سلام مجدد دارم. موضوع بحث ما امروز راجع به مزیت‌گرایی هوشمند هستش که در واقع یک رویکردی هست که از سال 2011 به طور گسترده در اتحادیه اروپا مورد استفاده قرار گرفته در بحث سیاست‌های نوآوری منطقه‌ای و به خاطر موفقیت‌هایی که داشته وارد در واقع برنامه‌های سیاستی انسجام اتحادیه اروپا شده. طی دوره 2014 تا 2017 کیس‌های متعددی در این خصوص در کشورهای اروپایی و کشورهای غیر اروپایی در واقع اجرا شده. به علت موفقیت‌هایی که داشته چه از منظر سیاستی چه از منظر عملکردی باعث شده که در دور جدید سیاست‌های انسجام اتحادیه اروپا همچنان حضور داشته باشه و علاوه بر اون کشورهای زیادی از مناطق غیر اروپایی و کشورهای کمتر توسعه یافته هم به اون اقبال نشون بدن. این رویکرد در سیاست نوآوری منطقه بر مبنای اولویت گذاری پایین به بالا هستش که بر اساس یک فرآیند کاملا مشارکتی بین ذی‌نفعان کلیدی منطقه در واقع اتفاق میفته که تحت عنوان فرآیند کشف فرصت‌های کارآفرینی ازش نام برده میشه. از اونجایی که این فرآیند یک فرآیند مشارکتی هستش و رویکرد اون یک رویکرد پایین به بالا در سیاست گذاری هست و علاوه بر این همچنان باید با اون سیاست‌های بالا به پایین نشنال و ملی کشور همخوانی داشته باشه. یک دشواری‌هایی رو پیاده سازی اون به همراه داره، به خصوص در زمینه کشورهای در حال توسعه، از منظر جلب مشارکت تمام ذی‌نفعان کلیدی منطقه، تامین مالی اون و در واقع جلب مشارکت جامعه مدنی و مسائلی از این دست که اینها باعث میشه که همچنان جای بحث و گفتگو داشته باشه، به خصوص در زمینه کشورهای در حال توسعه و مناطق کمتر توسعه یافته. از این رو ما امروز در خدمت خانم دکتر مارینا رانگا هستیم. ایشون یک متخصص سرشناس در این حوزه هستند که در مرکز پژوهش‌های مشترک اتحادیه اروپا با عنوان یک در واقع مسئول سیاستگذاری فعال هستند و علاوه بر این در دانشگاه ورشو در حوزه نوآوری و کارآفرینی استاد دانشگاه هستند. سالها تجربه داشتن در خصوص اجرای این سیاست‌ها در اتحادیه اروپا تحت پلتفرمی که برای این مسئله طراحی شده تحت عنوان Specialisation پلتفرم و ما امروز از بحث ایشون و گفتگوی ایشون استفاده خواهیم کرد. این در واقع بحث در مباحث ضبط خواهد شد. شما میتونید بعداً در واقع ورژن ضبط شده این رو از طریق آپارات، اینستاگرام و یوتیوب دسترسی داشته باشین و بهش مراجعه کنید. علاوه بر این ما خیلی خوشحال میشیم که مشارکت شما رو داشته باشیم. برای همین میتونید سوالات خودتون رو در حین وبینار به صورت کامنت در پیج اینستاگرام پژوهشکده قرار بدین. علاوه بر این یک نظرسنجی هم ما در استوریمون داریم که میتونید از اواسط وبینار تا هفته آینده در اون شرکت کنید و نظرات خودتون رو راجع به این در واقع وبینار بدین. ما خوشحال میشیم. حالا من از خانم دکتر میخوام که بحثشون رو شروع کنن. Good afternoon, Dr. Ranga. We are very happy to have you here in this webinar, and we are very grateful for the time you dedicated to sharing your experience with us. Maybe in the beginning you want to say hello to the audience and then start delivering your presentation.
Yes, of course. Hello, Safora, and hello, my friends and colleagues from Iran. I'm really delighted to be with you this afternoon. Thanks very much for having me, for inviting me for this very exciting talk. And I'm also very pleased that you chose this topic for the webinar on smart specialization, because this is a very important topic for innovation policy, not only in Europe, very much in Europe, but not only. And I'm really very happy to share with you some of our insights and the experience that we've had over the recent years in implementing this concept.
Okay, we are delighted. We are delighted too.
Well, perhaps we should already start the presentation, because I know our time is rather limited, and we also want to save some time at the end for the discussion, because the things I will tell you through this presentation will just invite you on further reflection and analysis whether these kind of principles would have any relevance to Iran. So I'm hoping that at the end of my presentation we can start a discussion on how these ideas would have a reception in your country, how would that fit to your current innovation policy context, and whether there would be some concrete ways to take this further. So let me share my screen with you, and so I can start my presentation. This is basically a presentation where I would like to go through a number of issues. I would like to give you some key features, some signature features of the smart specialization concept for those of you that are not so much familiar with it. And then I will tell you some of the implementation experiences that we had during the last 7-year period, 2014-2020, which is the European Commission financial period. Then I would share with you some of the lessons we learned, and at the end, as I said, we will discuss a few things that I hope will be relevant to Iran. So with no further ado, let me share with you some of these main features, key characteristics of the smart specialization. It started as a core concept of the 2014-2020 financial period, where the European Commission has applied a reform cohesion policy, placing regional innovation and place-based innovation at the heart of these policies. So there were, in very broad lines, there were 4 main characteristics for the smart specialization. Basically, it means targeted investment in strategic priority areas, whereby each country or region would identify such strategic investment areas in those particular domains where you would have the best match between research and innovation assets, the knowledge base, and economic and business assets, the production and economic base. This should be a limited set of priorities just because we want to channel our investments on a limited set of areas rather to spread it very broadly. The identification of these priority areas is done in a rather novel way. It's this bottom-up approach, bottom-up identification and setting of priorities through the so-called entrepreneurial discovery process. This is a metaphor which basically means involving all the relevant innovation stakeholders of the region or of the country. So they come together, they discuss the main priority areas, and they also continue to work together to pursue, to implement those development projects. So this collaborative, participative approach across the quadruple helix actors is very important to define this shared vision for regional innovation, particularly regional. But as we will see, there have been also countries that did it nationally. For the European Union member states, we discussed about the principle of multi-level governance, which means a correlation between different territorial levels of governance, regional, national, and EU. But of course, for countries outside the EU who are interested to apply the principles, they can always play this between the regional and national levels as well. So the EU level can be taken out from this equation in those countries that are not part of the EU. And finally, this novel approach not only brought research and innovation policies to a next level, but it also aimed to make sure that the European Union structural funds got a better utilization, would be more responsive to regional needs, to research and innovation policies, and would be also complementary to the existing national or regional funding. After the 7 years of the period to the 2014-2020, we also retrieved the smart specialization concept also in the new cohesion policy of the Commission for the next 7-year period, 21-27. And you will see it here, the first of the 5 major investment priorities for regional development. The first one, Smarter Europe through innovation, digitalization, economic transformation, and support to SMEs. And so this continued life of the smart specialization concept is the result of a successful implementation over the past 7 years, and also the reflection of its adaptation to the new challenges, particularly the green and the digital transitions, the twin transitions that we have for the next 7 years. And we will see in a moment the transition of the smart specialization strategies S3 to a S4, that is smart specialization strategies for sustainability. This is a broader framework of the new cohesion policy. I will not go through every detail. I just wanted to show you that we retrieve smart specialization as one of the major 5 investment priorities. And that means, in concrete terms, an enhanced focus on smart specialization, which will come across and will cut across more and more fields compared to what we have already seen. Now, for those of you who are wondering, what is it that the smart specialization has brought new? Let me make this quick comparison between S3 and the traditional research and innovation and industrial policies. And we will find here, for instance, this EDP, entrepreneurial discovery process that I mentioned, which combines the top-down approach that we were used to in the past with this bottom-up prioritization by stakeholders, so that the parties will meet somewhere in the middle. It will not be just the top-down prioritization by the central government or the state planner that we had seen in the past. There is also a difference in the focus of smart specialization approach on knowledge-based assets and their connection and match with economic activities, rather than the focus on particular industries and direct allocations of funding for particular industries. The smart specialization approach also operates in a more exploratory manner, using different experiments based on markets, based on technology tools, based on SWOT analysis, different surveys. So it allows for more flexibility rather than just, as I said, just allocating some subsidies to vertically integrated sectors within some predefined technological paradigms. There is also a concentration of investments in particular sectors that are considered to be highly competitive and not necessarily highly competitive at the present moment, but with a great potential to become competitive in the past with the help of these investments, and also by applications of the so-called general purpose technology. So that is what brings into the picture this technology development dimension of smart specialization, rather than the spread of R&I investments across many sectors as in the previous approach. You see, smart specialization has had a glorious trajectory, basically. It had risen to the heart of EC policies, but in fact, the roots or the foundations of the principle have been around much earlier, before 2014. So I have figured here, I have presented a sort of evolution of the concept where you can see the regional innovation ideas and the theories that were present very much in innovation literature already from the 90s. Those of you who are active or who are working in innovation and research studies, you are familiar with the regional innovation systems and the discussion versus national innovation systems theories. Then by the middle of the first decade of the year 2000, so between 2005 and 2009, there was this expert group, Knowledge for Growth, that brought together European and US experts to advise the then Commissioner for Research on avenues for investing in research and innovation that would bring greater economic competitiveness. The concept was then became the focus of different academic analysis throughout the first decade of the 2000s, and so it had come to a aggregation of bodies and body and theories that made it very relevant to the EU policy. So we retrieved the concept in a lot of the policy documents of the Commission, Europe 2020, the Innovation Union, the Digital Agenda, and the Cohesion Policy. That was the most relevant to us. And as I have shown you, it's also present in the 21-27 Cohesion Policy as the policy objective 1. The success came very much from this combination of a policy rationale and an economic rationale, whereby you combine the focus or the importance given to innovation as a priority for all regions, the wish to connect research and innovation in a better way to local development, to allocate investments in the regional strengths and those areas that can bring you further with this bottom-up strategy, all with the purpose to identify market niches in traditional sectors, to find new ways for new actors or even existing actors to assert or reassert themselves locally, nationally, or even internationally. And in this process, of course, develop new technological sectors. A lot of the smart specialization is about modernization of existing industries, creation of new industrial sectors, and particularly creation of these new partnerships that would allow the development of critical industrial projects. For those of you that are active in innovation studies, this is that evolution of innovation models that I mentioned before, where you see national innovation systems and regional innovation systems. So the systems model of innovation emerging already from the 80s, but a lot of that has been present before that, linear models, interactive models, and a lot of that came after, particularly these helix models that we are experimenting today. The concept has actually seen a very wide implementation in the EU. A lot of that came from the so-called ex-ante conditionality that one of the Directorate Generals of the European Commission, DG Regio, has proposed. And that meant a sort of obligation for European regions and member states who wanted to access structural funds provided by the Commission to have in place these regional smart specialization strategies or national smart specialization strategies to make sure that the objectives, the goals that the regions and countries had in mind for the expenditure of these structural funds would be in line with the goals of the Commission. So there have been over 120 smart specialization strategies prepared by the member states and the regions, identifying these national and regional priorities. There have been also impressive amounts of money allocated for these purposes, coming all part of the Commission, but there has been also some co-funding, national co-financing. You see here some amounts, over 40 billion from the European Regional Development Fund and over 65 billion from national co-funding. And also other complements to that, the European Social Fund for Human Capital complementing almost 2 billion. There have been some targets also defined by regions and countries. You see here some impressive targets that had been defined at that moment. Now, at the end of this programming period, we are working to see how much of those targets have been achieved and how much the smart specialization has contributed to closing the innovation divide in Europe. But now you see something that may be also interesting for you as a non-EU country, because I don't want to focus so much on what happens within the EU, as I want to emphasize what would be the relevance for non-EU a country like you. So there was also an emphasis and an interest for SPRI also beyond the EU, coming from the OECD, where a lot of OECD countries just coming out of the financial and economic crisis of the 2008, 2009, they were looking for solutions, new solutions to the global crisis. There have been a lot of OECD debates on the so-called new industrial policy or new sources of growth, new approaches to economic challenges. And there was a lot of debate within OECD countries on two main global trends. On the one hand, what would be a good solution to this slow growth, high unemployment, low demand, high public deficits, and innovation was considered to be a key to this revival, economic regrowth, investment, especially with the help of the general purpose technologies. And on the other hand, it was this weakening of the national innovation system approach as the main unit of analysis in favor of the regional approach, which would give you a better idea of what's happening at the regional level or at the level of global supply chains. Particularly in the global supply chains, global value chains, there has been this gradual shift towards specialization in specific business functions rather than industries or sectors, like supply chain, R&D, procurement, operations, marketing, rather than a full development of full sectors directly engaging broader economic areas. Now, in terms of concrete support that has been given to the implementation of smart specialization, Let me tell you a few words about the Smart Specialization platform that was created starting from 2011 and then was developed gradually since 2011 at our GRC center in Seville, in Spain. The Smart Specialization platform is basically a huge instrument, a huge tool now meant to assist national and regional policymakers, academics, business people, I mean, all the innovation stakeholders that are interested in applying and participating in the concept. As you can see here, there are several countries and regions that are registered in the platform, 19 EU countries, almost 180 regions that are registered, but also several non-EU countries and regions, 7 countries and 30 non-EU regions, which means that all of these countries and regions are our partners, are participating in the events that we are organizing and are collaborating with us on a permanent basis. Something that would be interesting to know for you is that the registration on the SPRI platform is open. So if you are interested, you can indeed register and become a collaborator, become involved in the multitude of activities that we are carrying out in this direction. And that includes all sorts of methodological activities, workshops, seminars, conferences, studies, direct projects with direct application in one or another country. I will tell you right away about this. So the procedure to access the platform is quite simple. There are details about it on the platform. You can check these links to see more details, but basically it's about sending an email to this address to my colleagues, indicating who would be the contact people, what is their level of involvement, what are the sectors that you would want to see developed, if there is a link to a certain original innovation strategy or department, and so on. Yeah, I mean, there are some steps that need to be seen, and then you can become a member. Now, in order to give you an idea of the activities that we have provided in support of smart specialization, I will take you through some of the activities that are described here, some of the main lines of implementation, particularly the governance here, the entrepreneurial discovery process, the monitoring and evaluation, a quick description of what we mean by the shift from S3 to S4, so smart specialization strategies for sustainability. And also the industrial development dimension that is encapsulated here in the interterritorial cooperation. You also have details about a collaboration with non-EU countries. These are some of the tools that we are using in order to assess regional differences or regional developments. And here in the knowledge rubric, you can have news, events, and the publications database, which is a huge one. And I'm really strongly encouraging you to have a look and search by keyword. You will find a great deal of information on S3 related topics. So just a quick word about the guidance, because this has probably been the most important contribution that we had in terms of establishing some sort of foundation, a methodological foundation for implementing the concept. The very beginning, smart specialization was one of those notions that if you asked 100 people, you would get 100 answers. And everyone had their own vision on the concept, based, of course, on their experience, on the way they had addressed regional innovation before, and so on. So I have selected here a number of documents in chronological order, but again, these are just a few. You can find much more in the publications database. For instance, there was this guide to RIS3 published in 2012, which identifies 6 practical steps for the design, for formulating smart specialization strategies, starting from analyzing the innovation potential of the region or of the country, then clarifying the governance features, developing a shared vision, identifying the priorities, defining an action plan, and the policy mix that would serve that action plan, and then going to monitoring and evaluation. And 1 year later, my colleagues came back with this updated methodology. This is a very clear and pragmatic document if you want to get yourself an idea of what means to design a RIS3 strategy. Then later on in 2016, we have produced this S3 handbook, which refers to the implementation process and how do you work actually with the implementation, you know, moving from design to implementation. Then towards the end of the programming period in 2018, there was another document that helps assessing investment priorities, whether those priority areas have been correctly identified, whether the approach has worked, you know, this kind of analytical evaluation. And finally, in the early months of this year, my colleague came with this document and intervention logic approach for the design and implementation, which again comes to analyze whether the priorities have been correctly set, if their financial, administrative resources have been effective, and so on. So these are just some of the main methodological pieces, but again, you will find a lot more in the library. This is one of the outcomes of this socioeconomic analysis that people use in designing a RIS3 strategy. It's called the RIS3 assessment wheels. And the wheel is based on the 6 steps that I mentioned before. And within each steps, there are a number of criteria that you can scale using this scale from 0 to 5. And then in the end, you will get a spider graph, which will show you the strengths and weaknesses across the areas that are relevant. And so that will help the policymakers understand where are the weaker parts and where they can direct their efforts. In terms of governance of smart specialization, there have been several projects looking at different governance mechanisms, but I would like to highlight 2 in particular that were conducted by my unit, and my colleagues, myself included. We have performed 2 targeted support projects to 9 regions, lagging regions in 9 countries, from 2016 to 2020, so for 4 years. And these 2 targeted support projects have been actually conducted in very close interaction with other smart specialization projects, looking, for instance, on smart specialization and higher education, the role of universities, or the links between smart specialization and the Horizon 2020, basically synergies between different funding sources. All this package that you see here was the so-called SPRI package of projects that we have been busy with for 4 years, from 2016 to 2020. This lagging regions project was particularly productive and fruitful for us because we included here regions from 2 categories of countries. First of all, in the low growth regions here, we included regions where the GDP per capita was below the EU average. And the other category these were regions even further behind, where the GDP per capita was below 50% of the EU average. And when you look at the territorial distribution of these countries, you see that we basically have Southern and Central Eastern Europe. Southern Europe here with Greece, Italy, Portugal, and Spain, and Central and Eastern Europe here with Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Croatia, which joined in the second stage. And this is a list of the regions that have been involved, some in the first stage, the first 2 years of the project, and the others joined in the second stage, the last 2 years of the project. And this, thanks to the regional diversity and also different approaches to regional innovation in these countries and regions, we have been able to extract a lot of relevant lessons and insights about the implementation of smart specialization, particularly in these lagging regions. There have been also inputs from more advanced regions because we've been trying to partner these lagging regions with more advanced ones. But of course, the strength of our observations come mainly from the lagging regions. There has been also some work on EDP, and here are some documents that you may be interested in if you are if you want to learn more about the inner works of the EDP. They started to come from 2017 onwards. There has been a lot of work on monitoring and evaluation, and these two aspects have been the object of our activities for 4 years. At the end of that, we have produced a MOOC on monitoring smart specialization. This is the link that will give you to the MOOC. It's free. If you want to take it, just click on it, register, and go ahead with that. That will give you a very clear picture of what are the main issues at stake. How can we connect the clear logical, if the logic of intervention is clear, how can we connect it with SPRI priorities, with the policy mix, with the indicators, who's gonna do it, what kind of indicators can we use, and so on. And then also, as the evaluation is concerned, there is also a paper that explains many of the principles that have been considered in that discussion. Now, since you are many of you are part of universities, you may be also interested in the role of universities in smart specialization. We've had this project, Higher Education for Smart Specialization, which started again in 2016 until 2020, but it's also continued. We have looked at different countries. You have here a number of case studies. Again, you can click on these links and that will bring you to the story of that case. There is a handbook that was produced based on this project. This was conducted by the GRC in collaboration with DG Education and Culture. But we are also moving on with new insights to the role of universities. And we are going to have a book launch very soon on the 18th of June, Regional Innovation Impact of Universities in Europe. So if you click on this link, this will bring you to the registration page of the event. So if you are interested, you can join and see what is the thinking about the continuation of this project. Now, a very quick word about the thematic platforms. I was telling you about this industrial development dimension. Smart specialization has a very, very important contribution to the development of different industries, technological sectors, niches, and so on. And the support that was given through the SPRI platform was materialized in these three thematic platforms that were created from 2015 to 16. Agri-food, energy, and industrial modernization. In fact, what these thematic platforms represent is just inter-regional partnerships between different types of stakeholders from over 100 regions that decide to come together as a regional partnership in areas that they themselves decide. The purpose is to create this collaboration to prepare mature investment projects together and develop shared infrastructure, testing facilities, pilot plants, data centers, and so on. A lot of clusters are also involved in that, and that also facilitates the combination of different investment instruments in the development of those clusters or the regional partnership per se. A great focus in these partnerships was placed on the so-called KETs, key enabling technologies. You may be familiar with the term. This is basically a set of general purpose technologies. You have them represented here, from photonics, micro, nanoelectronics, nanotech, biotech, advanced manufacturing technologies, advanced materials, that are credited with a very important growth potential because they have applications in multiple industries, and they are very good innovation enablers. They have high economic and employment potential as well. There is a great global market for that, over 1 trillion euros, and there's also a very big production volume for that. So all in all, big perspectives for development around these KETs. The industrial modernization platform, but one of the three, has been looking at these KETs in particular. And here we see a lot of interregional cooperation projects that have been designed in a pure bottom-up approach. They have been co-developed, co-led by the regions. They brought together industry, companies, clusters, research institutions, academia, civil society, entrepreneurs. So basically the whole quadruple helix was there. And if you want to have an idea about the types of industries they are covering, you can see here I've selected a few of the 21 thematic partnerships under the industrial modernization platform. It can go from advanced manufacturing to textile, medical technology, photonics, non-food biomass, social economy, chemicals, mobility, mining, water territories, artificial intelligence, and so on, cyber valleys, and so on. So a great variety of topics for interregional partnerships. And what's very interesting to note here is the fact that the thematic platforms are continued in the current financial framework in a new form. So a lot of investment is expected to be allocated to these projects. For non-EU countries, there has been also activity directed to non-EU countries, and you may be interested to know what have we done in that direction. There have been three categories of non-EU countries that we worked with. First, what we call the EU neighborhood countries. The neighborhood countries include Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, Azerbaijan, but we have worked particularly with Moldova and Ukraine, introducing an S3P pilot project and helping these two countries to introduce some of the S3 principles in their innovation policy. We have also worked with the so-called enlargement countries, that is countries that are candidates for accession to the EU. These are mainly Western Balkans countries, Serbia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Kosovo. Serbia is probably the most advanced of them. If you click on those links, you will get information on the particular state of play with each of these countries. And then also Turkey has been very active in implementing some of the S3 principles. We know that in Turkey, there is a great influence of the central government in the research and innovation activities, but there are also 26 regional development agencies at the NUTS2 level, which were set up in 2002 to coordinate regional policies. And these agencies have been very active. In particular, 12 of them have already developed their regional innovation strategies, and 4 out of these 12 are already registered in our S3P platform to cooperate with the JRC and go more actively towards S3 principles. So of course, it's still the early days, but we see a very active interest from Turkey in applying some of the philosophy behind the S3 here. There are participatory meetings at the regional level involving a broad range of actors, very much in the same spirit as we do in the EDP. Although, of course, they do not have the same methodology and things like that, but they are working along the main lines of those methodologies and trying to make these meetings and priority setting process more systematic. I was telling you about this shift from S3 to S4. This is a rather recent development. We are still in the very early days. The S4 term actually comes from this report of Philip McCann and Luc Soete, which deals with place-based innovation for sustainability. And the main idea of that is to try to better link smart specialization to the European Green Deal, particularly these green and digital transitions. And it's also an attempt to link the S3 to the so-called mission-oriented policy approach of DG Research. That is the investments on research and innovation made by DG Research on the so-called missions to be better linked with the smart specialization philosophy. You can take a look at this report in order to get yourselves an idea of what the directionality is and what the link is with the missions. But keep an eye on that, because the concept is still being built. So there are no clear lines yet. I mean, there are some directions, but the body of the concept is still very much in development. Okay, now having seen that, let me move to the next part of my presentation in terms of lessons. What have we learned? Because this 7-year period, 2014-2020, and all these projects and meetings and methodologies and guidance that we developed were particularly productive for us in terms of learning some things, a thing or two about S3. Perhaps the most important realization was the fact that S3 goes far beyond research and innovation. It started as a way of better connecting research and innovation with regional development and industrial policies. But in fact, we realized that the intersections, the convergence between research and innovation, industrial policies, regional development, education policies, higher education, skills, all this, industrial digitalization, all these are much more connected than we had imagined, and they need to be approached from a much more integrated perspective. And this is also the source of a lot of difficulties in the implementation of the S3, because this hybrid nature requires coordination and communication, not just across several policy fields that have their own strategies and policy mixes and instruments, but also communication and coordination between several national and regional agencies within the same country, and stakeholders with different work cultures, rewards, incentive systems. To put it bluntly, people who didn't talk to each other before, now all of a sudden they are supposed to come together to identify some common objectives. And that was rather difficult to achieve. But things happened, and we have done quite well in that direction. from another point of view, we also learned that this S3 brought innovation governance to the next level, in the sense that it highlighted the systemic nature of research and innovation, and particularly the articulation between the national innovation system and all these regional innovation systems that are more or less advanced or more or less mature, particularly in centralized countries where the command comes from the top down in a very important manner. In those countries where regional innovation systems were less developed, were only incipient, S3 had a catalytic role. It really boosted the development of those regional innovation mechanisms by putting in place some, setting in motion some mechanisms that either were lacking before or were idle or weak. And so that was possible through a better interaction between local agencies, regional, national agencies. In the case of EU countries, interaction with the EU level as well. And in the process, particularly the regional authorities have been highlighted as a very important partner. At the level of policies, at the level of authorities, at the level of structures, institutions, at the level of matching between policy instruments and budgets and indicators and calls for projects and things like that. The regional innovation policies have acquired a new importance and a different look, a different perspective on that. And those implementing those regional innovation policies became also more important. And that led to the creation of new structures for regional R&I governance, like regional consortia or things like that. So basically, accommodating the regional partner in this bigger mechanism was a very important shift, a very important change in the way innovation governance was considered. Also, this coordination across several policy fields that I mentioned, and the distinctions that we have seen between centralized versus decentralized institutional setups, the ease or, on the contrary, the difficulty of different regional administrations to operate with multiple funding sources, with multiple innovation stakeholders, their convening power, their trust and legitimacy and autonomy or transparency or accountability mechanisms have come to the fore much more importantly. And so in many cases we had echoes, testimonies from our partners saying we have changed the relation between public administration and society or the citizen engagement in the course of these S3 processes. And finally, the institutional capacity has been increased significantly through a lot of training activities that we have done, a lot of conferences, meetings, working groups, all sorts of reunions that had this objective to increase strategic management capability, project management, evaluation, all these relations. Then there was also an important effect on the regional and technology base. There have been new forms of social capital that have been developed around these collective identities, these joint projects that have been formed. Some clarification about the regional industrial specialization came up also. People started to think better what they can do, how they can do it, what would be the investment they needed, and where they want to be. What they want to acquire new or what they want to modernize, and how they can use public procurement for that purpose, and how can they work better with business in order to achieve that. the role of the CATs, the key enabling technologies, was also very interesting to follow, because we have seen our own observations, but also some studies done by our colleagues who have noticed that the less advanced regions have actually benefited more from the CATs than advanced regions in order to activate their catching up processes. And there have been spillover effects, particularly between neighboring regions, contiguous regions from around the developed countries, Germany or France, spilling over towards neighboring regions that benefited from these virtuous circles. We have also seen that a lot of countries have introduced CATs among their priorities. Already in this 2017 study, there hasn't been an update, but already in 2017, we saw that almost 70% of the regions and countries had at least one SPRI priority related to CATs. And these three areas were particularly visible: advanced manufacturing system, advanced materials, and industrial biotech. We also learned about measurement and impact, and there have been a lot of discussions and debates about the indicators and which indicators to look at and at what moment, because if an industrial area is still early, it's not stable enough or it's not sustainable enough, of course, there may be a big risk in focusing on that rather than, a safe bet. So there is a need for a longer term approach for clear conclusions about causality. And at the level of regional agencies, it was not always easy to work with complex monitoring system because people were not used to working with indicators or to collect indicators or to interpret or to operate with different econometric analysis or modeling and things like that. So there was a need for training people or hiring specialists to do that, and extra effort for the regional authorities. We also try to assess the impact of S3 on reducing the regional innovation divide in Europe. And when we are looking at the regional innovation performance that is given by the Regional Innovation Scoreboard, the latest edition of the scoreboard gives us this picture in Europe, where the greens and the blues represent the more advanced countries and regions, and the yellow and the reds, the less advanced, the modest and the moderate innovators. And just by looking at this picture, you can see a very clear divide, with the north and the western of Europe being more advanced, and southern and eastern central Europe being farther behind. But if we are looking at the change over the last decade, particularly these years that are available in the scoreboard, we see that in fact there has been important convergence in regional performance. We have more regions that increased their regional innovation performance than regions that decreased it. You see, the ratio is about 2-to-1, more increase than decrease. And this tendency is visible across different groups of regional innovation, leaders, strong innovators, moderate innovators. But it's not visible in the last group, the modest innovators, particularly Romania and Bulgaria. And this is a signal for us that it's exactly those lagging regions where the needs are highest, where particular attention needs to be put, because some of those mechanisms that we see in other regions and countries working nicely and effectively there don't really work at the same level in these ones. So that calls for this increased attention on the modest innovators. A lot of this regional divide actually comes from strong gaps in the regional R&D investment. And this heat map shows you different concentrations of the R&D investment. Again, the dark reds are the most advanced. The paler colors are the least advanced. And what we see here is that again, a strong concentration of R&D investment in some regions in Europe, particularly around the capitals or around the headquarters of large technology multinational companies, metropolitan regions or headquarters of a single large tech company. For instance, Braunschweig in Germany has the highest R&D intensity because we have Volkswagen there, you know, the biggest European R&D spender. And the periphery is getting much farther behind. So R&D investment is indeed one of the major causes, but perhaps the realization that it's not just R&D investment is now coming more and more strongly to the fore. We also learned that we need to focus on more than R&D investment. We need to focus on different concentrations of knowledge, the shift to digital economy and in Industry 4.0. We have to focus on the quality of local institutions, and we also have to focus on the governance quality, because we know that poor governance reduces the chance to innovate. And there have been also a lot of studies that, especially in the recent years, that show that this wide assumptions that all innovation agencies are equally committed to, you know, the common great goal of implementing innovation. Well, that is not really always the case. And there are scholars who say that implementation of S3 in particular has proved to be a highly disruptive process, especially to those innovation elites that are more interested in exerting control rather than innovation implementation, or on the irregular political behavior from clientelism to corruption. Corruption is an issue that needs to be addressed more importantly. There is this study from 2014, which shows that over 60% of the population see corruption as a major problem, from 61% in Germany to 99% in Romania. And there are scholars who argue actually that institutional reforms that specifically focus on rent-seeking and corruption should be considered as de facto innovation policies, you know, part and parcel of innovation policies, particularly in the periphery of Europe. And now, for concluding this session, let me show you some of the things that might be relevant to Iran. Here, of course, we will not have this EU level in the multi-level governance, but we still have a lot of interaction between the national and the regional level. We also have a lot of synergies between research and innovation, industrial policies, higher education policies, regional development, and so on. Who's in the driving seat? Who can coordinate regional innovation? What is the relationship between national systems of innovation and regional systems of innovation? How can we prioritize in such a way to be more responsive to the regional needs? Would you be interested in initiating a cooperation with the GRC? So all these things could be part of the debate. I will close this presentation now, but I'm also looking forward to your comments, to your impressions, and to your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Ranga, for your very good presentation. It was really insightful and informative, and we enjoyed that. Now, I want to welcome the audience that have just joined us, and I want to mention that they can put their question in the form of comments in Instagram page of Sharif University Institute, and we will go on with some discussion, and then we will turn to the question which have been raised by the audience. And we will finish for 30 minutes, in 30 minutes. دوستان عزیز، ممنونم که همراه ما بودین من سلام خیر مقدم دارم خدمت همه اون عزیزانی که از اواسط برنامه ما پیوستن. من می‌خواستم بگم که ما منتظر سوالات شما هستیم. میتونید به شکل کامنت اونها رو در پیج اینستاگرام پژوهشکده قرار بدین و همچنین یک در واقع نظرسنجی هستش در استوری که میتونید بهش مراجعه کنید و پاسخ بدین. علاوه بر این ما الان در ادامه برنامه یک بخش رو داریم برای در واقع گفتگو با خانم دکتر رانگا و بعد از اون هم به سوالاتی که توسط شما مخاطبین عزیز مطرح شده خواهیم پرداخت و خوشحال میشیم که سوالات شما رو داشته باشیم. Dear Dr. Ranga, there are a few questions I like to ask. Maybe you mentioned somehow during the presentation about the benefits of implementing smart specialization strategies, but I want to ask about specifically about what are the significant benefits derived from the smart specialization for less developed regions.
That's exactly what I refer to this second part of the presentation in the lessons. The specific impact of implementing smart specialization in terms of acting as a catalyst to the regional innovation systems, which are still early, or are just in the early days in lagging regions. Because it mobilizes actors at the regional level and mobilizes resources and policy thinking and policy implementation mechanisms that give an important boost to this regional innovation dynamics. And not just innovation per se, but as I said, in combination with business, with economics, with clusters, with other actors that are now invited to contribute to the process of priority setting in the beginning and then implementing those projects that they found together as being important. So the boost to regional innovation systems is very, very important and perhaps the most important, of all. But apart from that, the fact that you bring together people that may not have been communicating to each other before has helped a lot in this circulation of ideas, this mobility, this opening of new perspectives between different innovation actors that were not accustomed to this collaboration and communication culture. And has opened some new ways of communication and collaboration between them. I have seen, for instance, in many cases, people from university who had never talked to people from companies, as strange as that may sound, or people from clusters, cluster managers who said, oh, we have now initiated some discussions with people from R&D departments in universities, and we are fascinated about the nice things they are doing. We didn't know about this. You see, as strange as that may sound, but these things are real. And it also gives a new light to the university research, particularly those universities which are very much focused on the education function, where the third mission, the tech transfer, commercialization of research, all this translational research part is not so important. This has already put that mission in another light. People are more interested in technology transfer. People are more interested in how to bring some new technologies to the market, especially those technologies initiated in universities. We have started to see a lot of talk about technology readiness levels. We have done a lot of training on technology transfer and commercialization of research, particularly academic research, to people who had no idea about this. Technology, what is technology level 3, 4, 5, or 6, and how do we get to 9, if ever at all? How can we find specific funding mechanisms, investment opportunities for this. Who could be the trainers, training instructors for this kind of technology transfer, technology development issues was a very important aspect of that. So all of a sudden you see this kind of technology topics much more in demand, both in the university and in companies, people, and things have to be done about it, especially in terms of training. We have spent the last about 5-6 months of 2020 in training, workshops, seminars, conferences on tech transfer, on intellectual property regimes, how to protect, how to build links, how to strengthen technology transfer offices in universities, you know, all these preparatory steps that lead the university in being a stronger actor in tech transfer and innovation at the regional level. So all these changes have been very important.
Thank you for clarifying that. Following the answer to the previous question, I have another question. How to identify local innovation stakeholders who should collaborate in EDP? How we ensure that critical mass, especially in the region with low social capital and trust?
You see, this is a very good question. We say who should be the regional innovation organizer, as we, you know, borrowing this term from the innovation literature. Who can be the regional innovation organizer? Typically, they can be the regional development agencies or regional innovation agencies, or some, you know, some regional agency that has a higher level of visibility and authority or convening power within a region. But in a country, I don't know exactly, you know, how developed or how important is the regional level in Iran. But if the regional agencies are still weak, there can always be an impact from the top level, from the national level, in terms of trying to organize and coordinate these kind of events regionally. You need to make sure that there are meetings and gatherings, you know, or reunions between this kind of local innovation stakeholders that are organized regionally. If you have a regional innovation agency or a regional development agency, fine, they can be the convener. They invite people to come together and identify areas of interest in I don't know, in agriculture, in health, in oil processing, or in automotive, you know, considering the industrial sectors, the economic sectors that are the strength of the region. And it's always important, as I said in the beginning, to match the regional and innovation, the research and innovation strengths with the economic strengths. If you have a very, you know, an institute for biotech or for oil processing or for agri-food research that is very good on the international plan, or, you know, it has a strong knowledge base, it's also very good to match that with economic actors like clusters or companies that operate nationally or internationally. So you create these coalitions of resources. This is very important. And try to bring in also entrepreneurs, or try to bring in professional associations who can give you a different perspective. This is what we mean by this quadruple helix participation. This is basically the first step in starting to design a RIS3 strategy, identifying the areas of priority for a region, and then implementing projects in those areas that would help them develop. The regional innovation agency can be the organizer. The convener can be, you know, the coordinator of that. And that has brought also new responsibilities to these regional agencies, because They were not necessarily involved in research and innovation before. This is what we have seen with a lot of lagging regions. You had regional development agencies that were doing development. This does not necessarily include research and innovation. This does not necessarily include tech transfer or intellectual property regimes. So they were put in the middle of a new universe that they were not prepared for. And so there was a lot of learning during these 4 years in particular, a lot of accumulation, a lot of instruction on research, innovation, tech transfer, IP, and so on, which the regional agencies have dealt with very well. And in some cases, countries have decided to create regional innovation agencies. They didn't have that before, starting exactly from these teams that have been strengthened over the years. So you see, all this converges towards the growing importance of the regional level in handling innovation issues, but also matching innovation objectives with the economic objectives.
Thank you very much. Based on the very participating nature of this approach, how we can participate local quadruple helix and especially civil society in less developed regions in the process?
That's a challenge. It's not easy, but it's not very, I mean, it's not impossible either, you know, because again, at the beginning, there's the novelty approach. Oh, you have the big convener, say the regional development agency or a regional innovation agency or a regional player who starts launching invitations. You are invited to, we call them EDP workshops, entrepreneurial discovery process workshops. So people in the region start receiving this kind of invitations to an EDP workshop where they are invited to discuss, to analyze development perspectives for the domains that I mentioned before. It can be agri-food or ICT or health or whatever, strawberry picking, whatever you think it could be a strength of the region. And the usual suspects who attend these kind of meetings are universities, because they are used to this kind of discussions. There's a much more important effort to bring companies on board, because they say, oh, what's in it for me? Why should I be there? Is there any money, or what's the gain for me to spend a few hours with you around the table on that day? And there's also a difficulty for the convener, the regional agency, to bring people around the table, and then to ensure a follow-up of this process, because from these discussions, what you usually have, you have this process of brainstorming where people come together. They say, oh, I think we should go there or there or there, and we should have this kind of innovation projects combining different actors. But these ideas are just the very beginning of what could be a solid project. And the consolidation of this idea, of this early stage idea towards a real project that can attract funding, this is something that needs time and needs people to stay concentrated around those projects. It's about the formation of a project portfolio, which is to be managed, to be coordinated by this regional agency, the convener. It's about launching calls for funding. It's about finding evaluators, going through the whole project cycle, from launching calls to selecting evaluators, to giving marks or scores, selecting the best ones, sending them the money, and let them go through all the steps. All this pipeline of projects happens at the regional level, and that gives another layer of responsibility to these regional agencies. That requires institutional capacity to handle that. A lot of such agencies don't have enough people, or the people there are already involved in other activities, so they will have to share, to split their workload. You need to retrain the existing people or hire new ones. So in terms of resources, that means some changes for the local agency. But again, this is not something that you build overnight, but it's not something impossible either. And sometimes it was exactly this journey, you know, exactly this transformation of those agencies that was very important for them. They said, oh, we started like an experiment, but in fact, we realized that it strengthened our capacity a lot. In terms of people, in terms of management capacity, in terms of interaction with the people, especially with the business. Companies and clusters are more difficult to convince to keep on board, but not impossible. And that requires a lot of, you know, dynamism, commitment of the people and so on. So it's a very much a social network, you know, that is involved.
Thank you. And now I think it's time to turn to answering some questions raised by the audience. And first of all is a question is about what are the most important indicators for assessing the success of SPRI?
If you look at the monitoring and evaluation slides that I showed, you have a very broad range of indicators that we are using to assess a success. Particularly, you are looking at indicators for, you know, the typical indicators for R&D, typical indicators for innovation, typical indicators for higher education and for entrepreneurship, for instance. But you can also include here indicators about general development like digitalization, broadband penetration rates. You can include here you know, just take a look at the range of indicators that you usually use for R&D, for innovation, for entrepreneurship, for digitalization. All of these apply. We look at a number of companies. We look at resources, you know, researchers, types of researchers. You look at R&D investments. You look at different high-tech, you know, the knowledge content of different high-tech or low-tech or medium-tech industries. Take a look at the European Innovation Scoreboard and the Regional Innovation Scoreboard indicators. The European scoreboard operates with 26 indicators, the regional scoreboard with 16 indicators. So these 16 indicators are available for the EU regions. But you can also use others. For instance, the DESI index that gives you an idea of the digitalization developments. That can also be used. There are other indicators, but again, which apply nationally, so not necessarily at the regional level. In some cases, the regions may also, or even the countries, may have a set of indicators that they work with nationally without necessarily going for international comparisons. They can also use that. Or they can also use the share of the EU structural funds that they have allocated for S3. That is another measure of success. But yeah, you know, perhaps the ultimate measure is this level of convergence between European regions. I mean, here within the EU. If you apply this to the context of your country, you would then compare different indicators that you have available at the regional level, look at their evolution over time, and then see if you see this convergence.
And the next question, is there any scientific article or formal report which shows the tangible result of S3 on economic status like employment, GDP, export, and things like that?
You see, this is a very tricky thing, because if you are talking about a direct causality between S3 and employment, or S3 and economic growth, or S3 and number of jobs, this would be very hard to establish. The direction of the causality can be very debatable. We do not work with that kind of direct causality, cause-effect relationships. There are studies, there is one report that I have given the link for in the presentation, which is the Science, Technology and Innovation Report 2020. It was a very good report from DG Research of June last year. And they have a whole chapter on regional indicators. They are all talking about the innovation divide rather than the S3 divide, you see, just because the range of interactions is so broad. And very clear cause-effect relationships would be highly controversial. So I cannot say, yeah, implementing S3 over the last 5 years has led to 15,000 new jobs. That would be quite risky to say, and I haven't seen that anywhere really. We need to operate within the limits of our regional indicators, and then see the effect of S3 manifested particularly through the effect of R&D investments, this kind of new institutional structures, for instance, new partnerships that have been formed, rather than other more concrete numbers.
We want to stick to our schedule, then we can have just one more question, and that is about, could private sector like large local companies lead S3 process and implementation in one region?
It depends on they can, in principle, of course they can, but it depends on the local configurations of governance, you know. And also it depends on the distribution of funding, the funding channels. In Europe, we have seen this growing importance of the regions, of the regional agencies, because they have been the main recipients of the structural funds. On the other hand, there have been national funding sources that were allocated to the ministries, to the national level. So the circulation, the funding flows, and the configuration of the funding flows gives you an idea of the agencies or the institutions who can be coordinators. If you have in Iran, that's why I'm telling you, you have to see what is the configuration of the funding flows in a region. If this leaves very much on funding flows coming from the government, then you would have government agencies handling that regionally. And then you have to see the relationship between these agencies and the large companies. If the large companies are themselves major sponsors of different activities related to innovation, technology development in the region, they can of course be conveners themselves. But again, you have to think, would such a large company, I don't know, some oil processing company, would they have the institutional capacity to coordinate the process, to launch these regular invitations, the EDP workshops? Can they constitute the project portfolios? Can they launch funding calls? Can they follow up the funding, you know, and the implementation? Or if they cannot cover the full pipeline, perhaps which part of the pipeline would they be best able to cover? And then for the rest, they should collaborate with a regional government agency. So you have this kind of partnerships, new partnerships that can be formed. It depends on who provides the funding and the policy mix and the drivers, basically, for these ideas.
Interesting. Okay, I think we reached to the end of this webinar, and I like to thank you again for sharing your time with us. We enjoyed a lot, and I hope to see you again in this event.
Thank you so much. Well, I forgot to mention that we have already taken some steps towards discussing at least the relevance of S3 to Iran in our recent article, Safora. You know, we have a very interesting article about the relevance of S3 in introducing some innovations in higher education and entrepreneurship. You could perhaps advertise our joint article to your colleagues and friends, and they might find some inspiration in that article. And who knows, maybe new articles will follow from this debate. So I would be happy to follow this up. It was a pleasure for me to be with you. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. And I hope to continue our conversation at some times in the not too distant future.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye-bye to everyone.
از همه شما همراهان عزیز تشکر میکنم و امیدوارم که از این وبینار و مطالبی که ارائه شد استفاده کرده باشین. خوشحال میشیم که نظرتون رو در نظرسنجی که در استوری هست برای ما بگذارید و تا برنامه بعدی خدا نگهدار.